Montana Territory, October 1882. The wind cut sharp across the high plains as the sun dropped low behind the crazy mountains, and Willa Langford was down to her last match. She crouched near the fire pit, her hands trembling more from frustration than cold. Twigs snapped in her grip. She struck the match, cupping her fingers around the tiny flame, but it sputtered and died before it touched the kindling. She let out a breath, not a sob, but close behind her, a horse snorted. Willa turned fast, half rising, hand on the small knife at her belt. The man dismounted slow, not making any sudden moves. His coat was dusted with trail dirt, hat pulled low over eyes the color of a storm about to break. He looked like he had not shaved in days. His voice was low and rough, but not unkind. "You are not going to get a fire going like that," she straightened. "I do not need help." The man looked at the cold circle of rocks, then at her shivering shoulders. "I did not say you did, but let me help, just this once." Willa hesitated, her pride tight in her chest. But the sun was gone now, and the cold was slipping in fast. She stepped back. He crouched where she had been, pulled a small tin from his saddlebag. Inside were shreds of dry bark and a bit of flint. With practiced hands he coaxed a spark, then a flame, then a steady fire that crackled and spit warmth into the gathering dark. She crossed her arms. "You always ride around saving strangers." "No," he said, glancing up. "Only the ones too stubborn to ask for help." She did not smile. But her arms loosened. He stood, brushing dirt from his palms. "Name's Merritt Kade, Willa Langford. You out here alone?" he asked. She hesitated again, but then nodded. "Yes." He looked around at the sorry camp, the single tent, the unhitched mule, the dented tin pot. "This your land?" "Was my brother's. He died last winter. I came to settle it." "By yourself?" It was not quite a question. "I have 2 boys. They are waiting in town with the pastor's wife until I get the place ready." Merritt's brow furrowed. "You have children?" "Wesley is 6, Wade is 4. Their father left us in Kansas. Took the wagon and the oxen, left us with nothing. I came here because this was all I had left." She said it like a fact, not with bitterness, just the truth. Merritt nodded slowly. "You got grit. I will give you that." Willa looked at him, really looked this time. He was not young, not old, maybe 30 or so. His eyes held something worn down but not broken. She didn't trust men easy anymore, but something about him felt steady, like a post driven deep into hard ground. "I do not need charity," she said. "Good," he said, and his mouth twitched into something near a smile. "I do not give it." They shared the fire in silence for a while. She heated beans in her dented pot. He accepted half without asking, and she let him. Later, as the stars came out sharp and silver above them, she cleared her throat. "You passing through, maybe?" He looked into the fire. "Maybe not." She wanted to ask more, but the words snagged in her throat. Instead, she said, "Thank you." "For the fire." He nodded, then stepped back toward his horse. "If you are planning to fix up this place, you are going to need more than fire." "I can manage," she said. "I believe you can." He hesitated, then added, "But I will be nearby. Just in case." She watched him ride off into the dark, her arms wrapped around herself. The fire warmed her face, but not the ache in her chest. "Just in case," he had said. The next morning he was back. Without a word, he set to work repairing the front steps of the small cabin. She came outside to find him hammering a board into place. "I did not ask you to, I know," he said. "I do not need, I know." She stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes. "Because you should not have to do it alone." She swallowed hard, then turned and went back inside. By the 3rd day, Merritt had patched the cabin's roof, fixed the broken hinges on the barn door, and dug a new pit for the outhouse. He worked clean and quiet, never pushing, never lingering too long. Willa did not ask for help, but she stopped trying to send him away. She cooked meals and shared them without speaking much. He ate without complaint. They talked about the weather, the state of the well, the stubbornness of her mule, nothing personal. One night, after a long day clearing brush, they sat by the fire again. She handed him a cup of weak coffee. His fingers brushed hers, and she felt it in her stomach like a drop of water on dry earth. "You said you might not be passing through," she said softly. He nodded. "You have family somewhere?" "No. Never married." "No." She looked into the flames. "Why are you really here, Merritt?" He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. "I lost people. A long time ago. After that, I just kept moving. Figured if I never stayed, I would not lose anyone else." She looked at him then. Really looked. "You think staying means losing?" He met her eyes. "I did. Until I saw you trying to light that fire." She blinked, caught off guard. "That was nothing." "No," he said. "That was everything." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands. "I am not asking for anything," he said gently. "I just want to help, just this once." But they both knew it was not just once anymore, and it was not nothing. It was everything. The first snow came quiet, blanketing the earth in a hush that made every sound feel borrowed. Willa stood at the cabin's single window, mug of chicory in her hands, watching flakes drift past the frost-glazed glass. The land looked cleaner under snow, but no less lonely. Behind her, Merritt's boots scraped against the floorboards as he carried in a bundle of chopped wood. He set it beside the hearth and dusted his hands off on his trousers. "You've got a leak in the north eave," he said, not looking at her. "Snow'll melt and settle straight through if it stays like this." She hadn't noticed. She turned from the window and nodded once. "I'll need to patch it before it freezes through. I'll climb up after supper. Already brought the pitch from the shed." She didn't stop him. She didn't thank him either. He didn't expect it. Later, she stitched a tear in her only good skirt while he worked overhead. She heard the scrape of his boots on the roof, the occasional low grunt of effort. When he returned, his hands were black with pitch and his cheeks ruddy from wind. "You eat yet?" she asked. He shook his head. She ladled venison stew into a bowl and passed it across the table. "Where'd you get meat in this weather?" he asked between bites. "Traded preserves for it. The old miner east of here. He'd rather chew jerky than boil something proper." A faint curve touched Merritt's mouth. "You got a knack for making deals. Only when I've got something worth offering." "You do." She didn't answer. The fire popped in the hearth. She dipped bread into her own bowl and chewed slowly, watching the flames. "Wade and Wesley," Merritt said after a time. "They coming soon." She set her spoon down. "First thaw, I told the pastor's wife to wait until the pass clears. I want their beds ready. They've been sleeping in a loft above the church kitchen." He nodded. "They ever seen snow?" "No." She rubbed her fingers together. "Wesley thinks it's just cold rain. He's never asked what it feels like. You'll show him." "I intend to." Silence again, but it wasn't strained. Merritt finished the last of his stew and set the bowl aside. "Come spring," he said, "what's your plan?" "I plant." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Corn if the ground's soft enough. Beans maybe. I've got a few seeds tucked away. Chickens if I can get some from town. I'll need to fix the fence first." "You going to do it all alone?" She looked up, steady. "I've done harder." He didn't argue. "I could stay, help with the fencing, maybe build a coop." She studied him. "You said just once." "I did. And now," he ran a hand through his hair. "Now I don't much care what I said." She didn't speak for a long moment, then her voice came quieter. "I don't want the boys confused. If they see a man here, they'll think he's staying. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep." "Good." She rose and took the bowls to the basin. "Because I don't want any made." He stood and pulled on his coat. "I'll be back in the morning. That barn wall's leaning bad." She didn't stop him as he left. The door shut behind him and the wind slipped through the cracks like breath. The next morning brought stillness. No snow fell, but the drifts had deepened overnight, and the wind carried a sharp edge. Merritt came early, as he'd said, and set to work on the barn without a word. Willa joined him by midday, hauling nails in her apron and holding boards while he hammered. By afternoon, the wall stood straight again. While they worked, she glanced at his hands, broad, steady, marked by calluses not softened by time. She didn't ask about his past. She didn't need to. As the sky dimmed, he leaned against the fence and looked out over the white-covered field. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She shook her head. "It's not about where I am. It's about what I'm building." He turned toward her. "Then let me build it with you." She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her braid, and the cold found the space between glove and sleeve. She stepped closer, eyes on his. "I don't need saving." "I never thought you did." She reached out and touched his hand just once. Not by accident, he didn't pull away. They stood like that, still and sure, while the sun fell behind the hills and the snow turned gold. The thaw came slow that year, as if the earth wasn't sure it wanted to wake. Snow pulled back in patches, revealing the brittle grass underneath, and the cabin yard turned to mud where the sun struck longest. Willa stood in the doorway one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a washtub steaming at her feet. She had a cloth in one hand and a quiet in her that felt more earned than ever before. Merritt was mending the gate latch by the pasture, crouched low, his hat pushed back. She watched him work a moment, the way he checked the hinge twice before tightening it, then turned back to the water, dipping the cloth and scrubbing the boys' bedding with steady strokes. "When's the wagon due from town?" Merritt asked without lifting his eyes. "Tomorrow, if the trail's passable." "Pastor says he'll bring them himself." He nodded once, wiped his hands on his trousers, and stood. "I'll take care of the path down to the creek. Wagon'll get bogged otherwise." She wrung out a sheet and hung it on the line, the wind catching it hard enough to snap. "You always look for work, or is it just here?" "I don't sleep well when I'm idle." She glanced at him, then back to her task. "I noticed." He shifted his weight. "You thinking of teaching them yourself?" "They've had enough strangers for now. I've got readers, slates, chalk. Wesley's quick. Wade listens better when his hands are busy." Merritt leaned against the post near the line. "You got plans for a garden?" "I marked a patch behind the barn where the runoff won't pool. Need to turn the soil before the roots wake. I'll bring the plow down from the loft." "We'll need to grease the blade." She nodded, then added, "There's a patch of wild chokecherry near the far fence. I was going to boil down the fruit come July if the birds don't get them first." He gave a small sound, not quite a laugh. "You think 3 moves ahead, don't you?" "I have to." He stepped closer, the space between them closing slow. "You trust me yet?" She reached for another cloth, but her fingers paused. "I trust what I see." "And what do you see?" She met his eyes. "A man who keeps showing up." That night, she lit the lamp before the sun fully set. The wick glowed warm in its glass, and the corners of the cabin softened under its light. Merritt was at the table, shaping a length of rope for a halter. She handed him a tin of boiled potatoes and bacon. He took it with a nod, his thumb brushing hers. "You still thinking of leaving once the boys settle?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I thought I would, now I'm not sure." She sank into the chair across from him, arms folded. "What changed?" He looked up, slow and steady. "I stopped waiting for something better." Willa didn't look away. "I don't have much. You've got enough." The wind tapped the window pane, not hard, just enough to remind them the season wasn't done with them yet. Merritt set the tin aside, rope coiled neatly on the table. "I buried someone," he said, voice low. "Long time ago. A girl, pneumonia took her by the 3rd frost. After that, I didn't stop moving." Willa didn't speak. He went on. "Figured if I didn't let anything root, nothing could rot." She ran a hand over the tabletop, slow. That's not how it works. I know that now. The lamp flickered. Outside, night deepened. She rose and crossed the room. He stood too, as if drawn by something he didn't quite name. She reached up and touched his jaw, the rough edge of it, the heat beneath. "I'm not asking you to promise anything," she said. He leaned in, close enough their breath mingled. "I want to." She didn't stop him when his mouth found hers. It wasn't rushed, wasn't wild, just sure, just real. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "The boys will need a man who stays. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded once, then stepped back, her hand still resting against his chest. Outside, the night held its breath. Inside, she finally let hers go. The wagon arrived just after noon, the sun riding high and pale above the pinched horizon. Willa stood in the rutted yard with her hands twisted in her apron, the thaw-soft earth damp beneath her boots. Merritt stood a step behind her, not touching, but close enough she felt the weight of his presence like another kind of promise. The team clattered to a halt, hooves sucking at the muddy ground. Wesley leapt down before the pastor had time to set a brake, his boots landing unevenly, too big for his frame. Wade followed slower, his small fingers gripping the edge of the seat until Willa crossed the distance and caught him up. Wesley pressed his face into her side without a word. She wrapped one arm around each of them, her heart climbing into her throat. They were thinner than when she'd left them, faces sharper, eyes older but whole. She breathed them in, the smell of travel and dust and something faintly like wood smoke clinging to their coats. The pastor handed down a single trunk. Didn't want to burden them with more. They said this was all they needed. Willa nodded, swallowing twice before she could speak. "Thank you for bringing them." He tipped his hat, already turning the team. "Safe road to you all." When the wagon creaked away, Merritt stepped forward, crouching to Wesley's level. "You must be the one that runs faster than fences can hold." Wesley looked at him, wary. "That's what your ma told the mule," Merritt added. "When it got loose." Wesley blinked, then gave a cautious nod. Merritt extended a hand. "Merritt Kade." The boy took it slow. Merritt's grip was gentle. Wade peered at him from Willa's arms, thumb in his mouth. Merritt offered a small carved horse from his coat pocket. "Found this in the barn." Figured he was waiting for somebody. Wade took it without a word, eyes wide. That night, Willa laid out quilts near the hearth, letting the boys sleep close to the warmth. She sat cross-legged nearby, darning a sock by lamp glow. Merritt sat opposite her, whittling a length of pine down into something finer. "They're quiet," he said. "They don't know if it's safe to be loud." He nodded, not glancing up. "They'll learn." "I want them to," she said, setting the sock aside. "But I don't know how to show them what safe looks like." Merritt turned the carving in his hand. "It looks like what you've built here. It looks like someone who never leaves." The flame hissed as sap popped in the log. She leaned back against the wall, legs stretched out toward the hearth. "My father left when I was 10. Her voice was steady. "Went to buy sugar, never came back. My mother never spoke of him again." Merritt's knife paused. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, no one would need to leave," she went on. "But it isn't about need. It's about wanting to stay." He looked at her then, his eyes darker in the lamplight. "You've never asked me why I stayed. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." "I stayed," he said, "because I wanted to see what it would be like to belong somewhere again." She didn't answer, but her fingers curled lightly against her skirt. He set the carving down on the table. It was a bird now, wings tucked, smoothed by the edge of his blade. "You don't have to carry this place alone. I'm not used to someone offering to share the load. I'm not used to having someone to carry it with." The boys stirred in their sleep, Wesley curling closer to Wade. Willa rose and pulled a blanket higher over them. When she turned back, Merritt was watching her, not with hunger, not with pity but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had already decided. She crossed to him, took the carving, turned it once in her hand. "Looks like it's resting," she said. "It is." She met his eyes. "Do you want to stay?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," she nodded, set the bird gently beside the lamp and reached for his hand. Their fingers laced without effort, without ceremony. Outside, the wind had stilled. The land held its breath, waiting for spring. Inside, 4 people shared the same roof, under the same light, for the first time. And no one was alone. By the time the creek swelled with meltwater, and the fence posts began to lean from the softness of the ground, the rhythms of their life had settled into something solid. Willa stood beside the garden plot one morning, sleeves rolled, fingers sunk into the cold, damp loam. Merritt was a dozen paces off, turning the earth with the old walking plow they'd spent 2 days repairing. Wesley and Wade perched on the fence rail behind him, their voices rising with small, excited shouts every time the blade hit a stone. She pressed a seed into the dark furrow and covered it gently. The soil smelled of thaw and promise. "You planning rows straight through to Canada?" Merritt asked without looking up. "I like knowing what's coming next." He tightened the harness and gave the mule a soft click. Never known a woman to plant as much as she could carry. Willa wiped her hands on her skirt. "I don't intend to carry it alone." Later, they sat on the back step while the boys chased each other along the edge of the pasture. The light was long and gold, stretching shadows across the fields. Merritt had his boots off, toes in the grass. Willa held a tin cup of buttermilk, her head resting against the doorframe. "Tell me something about yourself I don't know," she said. He glanced at her. "I once slept in a rail car full of cotton bales for 3 days straight, Texas heat. Thought I'd gone blind when I climbed out." She smiled slow. "What were you running from? Not what. Who? A man owed me 2 months' wages and paid with a pistol that wouldn't fire." "Did you keep the pistol?" "I traded it for a mare with a limp. Rode her until she dropped in Nebraska." Willa tilted her head. "You've done more traveling than most men twice your age. I was looking for something steady. Didn't know it looked like this." She turned her cup in her hands. "You ever wonder if we're just making do? If we're all just picking up what's left?" "No." He watched the boys tumble in the grass. "I think we're building something better than what came before." She was quiet, but her hand slipped over his, fingers threading between. That night, while Wesley and Wade slept curled under a patchwork quilt, Willa stood at the stove drying dishes. Merritt set the last one down and reached for her waist. "Next winter," he said, voice low, "we should build the boys a loft. Give them more room." She leaned into him. "And a root cellar. The one we've got now won't hold through another freeze. I'll dig it deeper, shore it with stone." She turned, hands still damp. "You think you'll still be here by then? I know I will." She searched his face. "I want to believe that." He lifted her hands and kissed her knuckles one by one. "Then believe it." She did. Not because he said it, but because by now he'd shown her in 100 quiet ways. He never made a promise he hadn't already started keeping. Spring brought more than green shoots and warmer mornings. It brought neighbors, 2 Mrs. Harlan from 3 ridges over, offering a pullet in exchange for help with her chimney. The McCready brothers, come with a split axle and a sack of flour as trade for Merritt's tools. Willa welcomed them all, apron dusted with flour, boys at her heels. By mid-May, the garden had taken root. Wesley helped water the rows while Wade chased grasshoppers through the potato mounds. Merritt fixed the front porch railing and carved a sign for the gate, Langford. They painted it together, Willa's brush steady beside his. "You could have added your name," she said, eyeing the space beside the letters. He touched the wood. "I already did." One Sunday they walked to the church house at the edge of town. Willa wore the blue calico she'd been saving since Kansas, and the boys had shirts stitched from old flour sacks, hems neat. Merritt wore his best coat, freshly brushed, and stood beside her as the preacher spoke slow and plain. Afterward, in the quiet stillness of the chapel, Merritt took her hand. "I'd rather not wait." She looked up. "You certain?" He nodded once. "I've been certain since that first fire." So they were married there, with Wesley holding Wade's hand and Mrs. Harlan dabbing her eyes behind a lace handkerchief. No fanfare, no ring, just a vow spoken with clear eyes and a voice that didn't waver. That night, Willa and Merritt sat on the porch, the boys asleep, the land breathing soft around them. She leaned into his shoulder. "I never thought I'd feel steady again." "You are. And you?" "I was spinning for years, Willa, but you're the ground." She kissed him then, slow and sure, with nothing behind it but truth. Years passed gently. The garden grew deeper roots, and so did the four of them. They built the loft come autumn, and the root cellar held through 5 winters. Wesley learned to ride, Wade took to carving wood beside Merritt, and Willa's preserves were bartered 6 counties wide. Neighbors called their place the Langford homestead. But between the 4 of them, it was just home. And every night when the fire burned low and the boys' soft breaths filled the quiet, Merritt would pull Willa close and she'd rest her hand over his heart. Nothing needed saying. Nothing ever had. They had built something better than what came before, and they never once looked back.